All right, second to last video on the patch panel. I'm just going to go from the top to the bottom. This total input is a splitter. It's kind of like just taking the signal from a source and putting it into multiple jacks, except instead of having to patch the cables in yourself, you just throw it into the splitter and then it's automatically patched into the low pass filter, high pass filter cutoff, and the pitch of VCO 1 and 2. The nice thing about using the total is that it does have its own knobs that you can use to increase the intensity to various things that are separate from patching things into the pitch and filters directly. The next thing on the patch panel that I want to talk about is the notice how this source that I just used to patch in is the reverse out of envelope generator 2. You could patch that into mixer 1 and then go to the modulation tab, and then you can see that mixer 1 has an intensity that's positive and negative. Negative is just the opposite phase of the signal. So you can take that reverse envelope generator 1 output and actually give it negative intensity, and then it turns it into a normal H-ADSR envelope, which is kind of nice. Next thing is the modulation generator. You have your square and triangle out, and there's also the sample and hold unit. I'm not going to really go into these. I'm sure you're kind of savvy with them. Everybody has little tutorials on how to set up a sample and hold, and I'm not very impressed by that. There's a lot cooler things that are happening over here when it comes to CVs and trigger outputs. But something to note that is not so intuitive and that most people don't even go over is that the square wave that's controlling the clock source only triggers the clock when it's at a 0 point crossing, or when it's at 0. And you can see on the graphic here that it has it shows +5 at the top of the waveform and 0 at the bottom. It's just to say that it's unipolar, and so when it's at the bottom of the waveform, it's at a 0 point crossing. So when it's at that 0 point crossing, again, that's when it's holding, and the sampled voltage that's being sent to whatever you patch the output into. The other thing to note is that it works the same way when used as a trigger input. So if you take the square wave and put it into the trigger input for, this is the main one for both envelopes, then it will trigger when it's at the bottom of its waveform. So the other thing I guess to say about that is just that when you have the square wave MG on 10, it's essentially the same as having pulse width at full, which is just a DC offset. So it's not actually producing any sort of voltage. You need to have it below 10 in order for it to have any pulse width with which it modulates a signal. So the trigger inputs, you have one for, this goes to both envelope generator 1 and 2, or you have one for just envelope generator 1. The graphic actually says a lot about the signal path. So you can see you have your keyboard out, which automatically goes into the trigger input, and then the trigger input goes into envelope generator 1 and 2. Envelope generator 1 is of course hard patched into the cutoff frequencies with which you can increase the intensity of envelope generators to affect here. And then like if we look at these two knobs, it says MG/T/EXT. So you have your total external modulation intensity or your modulation generator intensity. And if we look at the patch panel, you can see that the modulation generator, its output goes into the total, which then goes into obviously everything respectively. I don't really need to go over the mod wheel and the button. They work like the MS-20, except you just need to assign the alternate modulation source. Oh, well, the last thing to go over is just the CV. So, the neat thing about the control voltage, you have the CV out from the keyboard, which is just by itself. It's also hardwired into the VCO 1 and 2 CV in for key tracking, of course. you can use the CV out to as kind of a key track for the cutoff frequency of either the low pass or high pass filter. The manual goes into how to create a kind of simple sine wave sub oscillator with the high pass filter. It's not very accurate. It's really difficult to tune the CV out intensity and frequency cutoff of the high pass filter to make it perfect. It's more so for kind of general key tracking. You do have VCO2 CV in separate from VCO1, or you have, of course, both of the VCOs CV in at the same time. But the nice thing about having VCO2 separate is that you can kind of do FM a little bit. So if you take the output of VCO1, patch it into A, also patch it into B, and then take that output, patch it into A, and then take the CV out and patch it into B, and then take that output and patch it into the CV input of VCO2. You kind of create an FM circuit. The reason why you need the keyboard CV out is because that's the standard control voltage that VCO2 is used to following. And the output of VCO1 is simply not strong enough to create much frequency modulation in VCO2. So with this setup, again, we have input A, input B, output going into A, and then the key tracking, and then that output going into VCO2 pitch or control voltage. If we look at the mixer, so we have VCO1 going into A. So if we increase that intensity all the way up, and then we increase the level A, which is the output of the first mixer, we then could turn down this knob all the way to phase cancel these two. So essentially this is boosting nothing. And now when you turn this all the way to the right, that's maximum boost. And of course we want to leave level B all the way up because that's the keyboard tracking for VCO2. And let me jump into the oscillator tab real fast. I go with a square wave and then a triangle wave and then have them on low. And that should be it. So now when I turn this up, and actually let me just make sure my filters are correct. Nope. Okay, so we need VCO2 level up and play an octave lower. And now let me go to the mod. And now when we turn this up, we'll get an FM. Sounds pretty cool. So yeah, that's all like the cool tricks with the patch panel. Is just kind of a kind of basic FM that you couldn't do on the original MS-20 because there are no mixers. Key tracking the high pass filter to create a sub, obviously sample and hold. Knowing how the square wave is re-triggering. Oh yeah, there's one more thing that I want to go over. So let me disconnect all. Something that's really neat, if I take the white noise, patch it into B, and then patch that output into A, and then have that go into the VCA. Side note real fast, the patching system works just like Mod 7, where anything that's patched into an input disables anything else that's patched into an input. So an input only takes one source, but you can patch any source to as many inputs as you want. But anyway, so I want to use the white noise from oscillator 1, and then I only want to hear oscillator 1, and then I'm going to take VCO2 all the way down and go back to the patch panel. We have white noise in B, white noise from oscillator 1 in A, the output is going into the VCA. And now, if we listen to this, let me go to 0, we have regular noise, but if we turn this dial with negative, we're essentially getting just a phase flipped version of the white noise generator. We get a perfect phase cancellation. So that tells us that the white noise is actually the same exact white noise generator that oscillator 1 is using. And why wouldn't it be? I mean, it just makes sense that they would use the same generator in the synth. Like, it's just practical. Like why have two separate ones? The pink noise is a separate story, actually. Contrary to what I just said, it does seem that the pink noise is its own. I tried to see if there's any phase cancellation going on, and there doesn't seem to be. So if we patch that in, if we just disconnect it, we can see that we hear both the white noise and the pink noise at the same time. So it does seem to be a separate generator. So that's it for this video. Next time, I want to go over the final video in the MS-20, which is going to be the external signal processor, where we can have a lot of fun with these different controls. But hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next weekend. Thank you.